Okay, and thinking about sensory cranial nerves or sensory nuclei that are involved with the cranial nerves, those are all going to be on this slide. Okay, so these are just all the sensory nuclei that you need to know about. The last slide was only motor. These are all sensory. And again, I'll draw them in bilaterally so it won't be too crowded when we get to the individual. Okay, first, the main sensory nucleus that you need to be aware of is going to be here, present bilaterally. It's actually composed of two parts. Those two parts have different names, but they function the same. Okay, this is going to be the main sensory nucleus of trigeminal. Okay, so the main sensory nucleus of trigeminal, and then working together with it functions exactly the same. There's going to be a long extension here. This is the bottom piece. Yep. This is going to be the spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Okay. So the main sensory nucleus of trigeminal and the spinal nucleus. Appropriate for Halloween. Somebody said it looked like a fang. Okay, so there's the main sensory nucleus and the spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Okay. And these together, remember all the sensory functions that we talked about for the different cranial nerves that were involved in these together combined are going to be responsible for receiving all sensory information from the head. Okay, so this is all, and if you want to think about it as all, we talked previously before about general sensory information. So all general sensory information, kind of like any feeling of touch. Okay, all general sensory information coming from the head is going to be received by the main sensory and spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Okay. Cranial nerve number 5 also has another big job. And I'm going to put that in this aqua color here. Okay. Does anybody remember what other sensory component the trigeminal nerve has?
Proprioception of mastication.
So this is going to be, that information is going to go through what's known as the mesencephalic, mesencephalic nucleus.
Could you do that again a little slower?
MESEN cephalic. So the mesencephalic nucleus. Okay, the mesencephalic nucleus receives information about proprioception, from muscles of mastication. Okay, mesencephalic nucleus receives information about proprioception from muscles of mastication. And then we also have bilaterally this nucleus you've seen me draw before as a little kite. I'll put it here. Okay, that's going to be your vestibular nucleus. Your vestibular nucleus receives information from your vestibular apparatus. And we'll have a whole day on vestibular stuff. But the vestibular nucleus, that's going to receive sensory information through cranial nerve number 8 from your vestibular apparatus. Cranial nerve number 8 is a vestibular cochlear cranial nerve. It also has another nucleus that it uses that's closely associated. Vestibular nucleus, it's going to be just above it. And this is going to be the cochlear nucleus. Cochlear nucleus receives sensory information from the cochlea, which is involved in hearing. That's the majority of the sensory nuclei. There's only one more, and I'm going to put that one down here in purple. Okay. This purple nucleus, I told you before to start thinking about purple as being associated with taste. It's because everything that has to do with taste uses these nuclei. And this is the solitary nucleus. The solitary nucleus. Okay, solitary nucleus, as I said, receives information about taste. It's also going to receive information from the carotid body using cranial nerve number 9. So if you remember that carotid body, sensory information, and it also is responsible for visceral sensations, from heart, lungs, and GI tract for cranial nerve number 10. Yes?
So the dark fluids, general secretion, or like fluids, what?
That's proprioceptive, that's the mesencephalic nucleus, and it receives proprioception information from the muscles of mastication through cranial nerve number 5. Okay? We'll draw that in. But right now, you just need to know that's the mesencephalic nucleus, and it's responsible for receiving information about proprioception from muscles of mastication. Any other questions? These are all your sensory nuclei that cranial nerves use. Okay, now we can start to put them all together. So the next one that we're going to look at is going to be the midbrain cranial nerve nuclei. Hopefully, here's my midbrain. My palm's just a little bit below it. Thinking about the nuclei. This next part is just going to be putting in the nuclei with the cranial nerves. So I'm going to combine what we just talked about today with what we talked about on Tuesday. And I'll start with the third cranial nerve at the top. So let's do it this way. And for this, I'm just going to do it on one side. Okay, so here's my third cranial nerve. Okay, that's cranial nerve number 3, and that's going to be my oculomotor nerve. Okay, so that's what we did on Tuesday. And in addition to that, we're going to start to think about the nuclei that this cranial nerve uses. It uses 2 nuclei. It uses the first for all voluntary motor functions. And that nucleus is the oculomotor nucleus. Going to use a different nucleus for the parasympathetic functions, and that nucleus sits right on top. It's called your Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So like I said, these are both motor functions. I'll wait for you to catch up a little bit. Some people. Does anybody have any questions about what you're seeing? So this is the cranial nerve, third cranial nerve that we drew the other day, and now I'm just showing you the nuclei that third cranial nerve is going to use. And that third cranial nerve has some voluntary motor functions. So to accomplish those voluntary motor functions, there's a neuronal cell body that resides in the ocular motor nucleus. It sends out axons as part of the third cranial nerve, and that's how it accomplishes its voluntary motor functions. Can anybody tell me what those are again? Third cranial nerve voluntary motor functions. Yeah, eye opening, so levator, palpebrae. Okay, and then one more.
Majority of
majority of extraocular eye muscles. Okay? So neuronal cell body in the ocular motor nucleus sends out axons as part of cranial nerve number 3 to accomplish eye opening, as well as innervation of the majority of extraocular eye muscles. And at the same time, there is a neuronal cell body in the Edinger-Westphal nucleus that sends out axons that travel as part of cranial nerve number 3. And this is how cranial nerve number 3 uses the Edinger-Westphal nucleus to control pupillary constriction and lens accommodation. Make sense? Yes. point to know from here is that the axons that are part of forming the third cranial nerve are coming from two different nuclei. Both the oculomotor nucleus and the Edinger-Westphal nucleus supply axons that eventually travel out of the brainstem and become the third cranial nerve. Does everybody see that? The other thing to know about these cranial nerves is that they are lower motor neurons. Okay? So the neuronal cell bodies that exist in these specific nuclei, those are lower motor neurons. So all the oculomotor nucleus, the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, they house lower motor neuron cell bodies, kind of like the neuronal cell bodies in the ventral great horn.
And what was that about? They leave the midbrain and turn to what?
So axons from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus and axons that originated in the ocular motor nucleus travel together through the midbrain opening as the third cranial nerve. So in other words, the third cranial nerve is composed of axons from two different nuclei. Okay? Those two different nuclei are there because there's different functions for the cranial nerve. Okay? This is a motor nerve. It has levator palpebrae as well as extraocular eye muscles, but it also has the pupillary constriction as well as the lens accommodation. So to do those two different tasks, you use two different nuclei. Questions about that? Okay, you got that concept, then we're good to go moving forward. I'll go ahead and this is just my midline. So, and like I said, this is cranial nerve number 3. And when I start drawing things with the cranial nerves and which nuclei are associated with which nerves, it gets kind of crowded. So I'm just going to do it on one side. Okay, realize this exists bilaterally. Everybody got it? So thinking about the next nerve in order, it's going to be cranial nerve number 4. And as I had done before, cranial nerve number 4, I had coming out. It's the only cranial nerve that exits the brainstem dorsally. It's going to come out of the brainstem dorsally and then travel around ventrally here. Okay. So this is my cranial nerve number 4. Okay, and that's going to be my trochlear cranial nerve. Okay, so that's my 4th cranial nerve, and as I said previously when we drew the nuclei, there's a motor nucleus that is unique to the 4th cranial nerve, and that motor nucleus is going to reside here in the midbrain at the level of the inferior colliculus, and this is going to be the trochlear nucleus. So the 4th cranial nerve is not only the only cranial nerve that exits the brainstem dorsally, it is also the only cranial nerve that decussates. Okay? If we're asking about decussation and that sort of thing, well, this is the only one that decussates, the only one you have to worry about going to the other side. So there's a lower motor neuron cell body, neuronal cell body here in the trochlear nucleus that sends out axons that actually cross over to the opposite side and then travel through the 4th cranial nerve to innervate the superior oblique muscle. That's an easy one. That's one job in life. The hard thing to remember is that trochlear is the only one that decussates. So if it's the left side, if the lower motor neuron is present on the left side of the midbrain, it decussates to the right side and exits the brainstem dorsally through the trochlear nerve, and that innervates superior oblique muscles. Questions about the midbrain cranial nerves 3 and 4? Yes.
So I'm assuming it's important to know that it decussates in the midbrain? Or
Yeah.
Does it vary? Or is it always in the midbrain?
Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere. All it does is it comes out, and in the midbrain it goes to the other side.
Okay.
Yep, doesn't go anyplace else. Okay, any other questions? Okay, let's move on to the pons. Let's look at the, oops, wrong one. These are going to be your pons cranial nerve nuclei. Remember those 4 above the pons, 4 in the pons, and 4 below the pons. Now we're going to look at the 4 cranial nerves that are in the pons, and we're going to start with the big one, and that's going to be trigeminal. Okay. Trigeminal exists here, exits the pons laterally. Trigeminal, and that's cranial nerve number 5. Okay, and again, because it'll get kind of crowded, I just want to stay on one side for each of the cranial nerves. So to make it clear, I'm going to put in my midline. Okay, let's start with motor function. Cranial nerve number 5, to accomplish its motor function, uses a nucleus here, a motor nucleus that we talked about previously. Okay, this is going to be the motor nucleus of trigeminal. Thinking about motor nucleus of trigeminal, it's going to be responsible for the motor functions or the voluntary motor activity associated with cranial nerve number 5. It's also going to have a large sensory component. Remember, cranial nerve number 5 is mostly sensory and a little bit of motor. To accomplish its sensory functions, it's going to use the main sensory and spinal nucleus of trigeminal, as well as this mesencephalic nucleus. So the main sensory, or the general sensory functions, are accomplished by main sensory nucleus of trigeminal, okay, as well. Working with the main sensory nucleus of trigeminal, you also have the spinal nucleus of trigeminal. nucleus. So the main sensory and spinal nucleus of trigeminal are going to be receiving information about general sensation through cranial nerve number 5. Okay. And above we have, this is the mesencephalic nucleus. And all we do is connect the pieces. And I talked previously about the motor nucleus of trigeminal. So we have the motor nucleus of trigeminal, has a neuronal cell body, lower motor neuron cell body, sends out axons that travel through as the trigeminal nerve and accomplish basic motor functions for cranial nerve number 5. And what's the basic motor function? Does anybody remember? Voluntary? Yep, muscles of mastication. And there's also, do it backwards, we'll say that the sensory information coming in for muscles of mastication. So here's proprioception for muscles of mastication. Okay, that information travels as part of cranial nerve number 5 and synapses here, neuronal cell body in the mesencephalic nucleus.
Did you write proprioception muscles?
Mastication? Muscles?
Underneath that, proprioception.
So I have proprioception, so here's proprioception, muscles of mastication.
Oh, okay. So again, for the...
Yep, so for the, so that function of cranial nerve number 5 uses the mesencephalic nucleus. Okay. And then the main function for cranial nerve number 5, remember all that general sensory information coming in from the face. And I talked previously about when we looked at the functions of the cranial nerves, when I showed the nerve testing, I talked about the ophthalmic and the maxillary and the mandibular divisions, so 3 different divisions for cranial nerve number 5 as far as the face is concerned. So I'll go ahead and put those here. So the lower motor neurons, or the sensory neurons, exist in something known as your trigeminal ganglion. Okay? So that's what I'm drawing out here. It's outside of the brainstem. Your trigeminal ganglion lives right here. Okay, the area of your temple, right here bilateral. Yes.
So that dot is the trigeminal ganglion?
Yeah, I'm just representing it as, I can put that in there. It's going to get crowded, but here, yeah, this dot is representing your trigeminal ganglion. Okay, your trigeminal ganglion is just sensory neuronal cell bodies that exist right here. Okay, it's outside of your brainstem. Okay. And there's 3 different divisions that you need to know. There's going to be 5-1, 5-2, and 5-3. Okay, 5-1 is going to be your ophthalmic division. So that's up here, in the area of your eye. Okay, 5-2 is going to be your maxillary area. And again, when I showed the testing videos, it had the face broken up into 3 different shaded areas. So there's ophthalmic, maxillary, and V3 or 5-3 is your mandibular division. ophthalmic, 5-1, maxillary, 5-2, and mandibular, 5-3. And all of these are going to be responsible for receiving general sensory information from the face through these 3 different divisions, right? So remember the cornea is involved there. That's actually part of the ophthalmic division, but I'll go ahead and put that in again. So the cornea, okay, just general sensation. Okay, we talked also about general sensation from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Just general sensation. And then the last general sensory information coming in through these divisions is going to be your nasal and oral cavities. Okay, so just general sensory information. Yes, Paul?
What was the general sensation of the face, and then what's right after it?
Cornea.
Cornea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, remember that's the afferent portion of the blink reflex. Alright, so you have your face, 3 different divisions, your cornea, nasal and oral cavities, and also general sensory information just coming from the anterior 2/3 of your tongue. So is somebody touching or something touching your tongue or not? Yes, Chase?
What is number 8?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
The low maxillary.
Mandibular? Yeah, that's the division, trigeminal division 5-3. Division 3. Johnny, did you have another question?
Yeah, so the general sensation is from the trigeminal ganglion, all of that general sensation.
Okay, so let me see if I can make it a little bit more clear. Maybe I didn't explain it very well. So if you want to think about the trigeminal ganglion being just like the dorsal root ganglia in the spinal cord. Remember how that's kind of on its own? It's part of the peripheral nervous system. That's where the ganglion are just that collection of cell bodies. So think about that as, if you want, the pseudounipolar first order neuron as part of the sensory system.
But I was saying, like, that part of, like, the general sensation you wrote about that, is that referring to the trigeminal ganglion?
Okay. So let me see if I can make it a little bit more clear. The trigeminal ganglion, this is the first order neuron cell body. Okay? That first order neuron cell body, the dendrites are receiving all this information, and then that information is traveling as an axon through this 5th cranial nerve and synapsing in either the spinal or main sensory nucleus of trigeminal. Does that make more sense? Yeah. Just haven't finished everything yet. But you got it now. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Yes. Go.
Along with the same thing, this might be silly, but like that circle, that cell body, that's not the trigeminal ganglion, right? Or is it?
This is the trigeminal ganglion.
So it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I've labeled it here.
You're
Here's
saying
the.
that's the trigeminal ganglion, and then that's the stuff that kind of comes out of it, that's sent out of it.
Again, if you think about the trigeminal ganglion being no different than the dorsal root ganglia, remember how the dorsal root ganglia had those neuronal cell bodies, the first order, and then the dendrites pick up this information, but then it sends out an axon that synapses here to deliver that information.
Right, so it comes in rather than going out.
All the sensory is going to come
They're
in.
all coming in.
All
So
this,
whatever you feel or whatever.
yes.
And
All the sensory is going to be afferent. All the motor is going to be efferent. Yeah?
Okay.
Does that make more sense
Yeah.
now? Okay. So it's a little bit different. So having the trigeminal is the only one that has that special ganglion. It's in a very specific place. Other questions about that? Is this making sense when you put everything together? Are we getting it? Yes? I know it's a lot. I know you had an exam. I'm sorry. I feel bad, but well, we just gotta keep going. You're numb? Okay. Well. Okay, any other questions about the concepts here? Because that's it for the fifth cranial nerve. This is all for the trigeminal. Okay? Trigeminal is one of those. It has a lot of functions associated with it. It's mostly sensory, but just a little bit of motor. To accomplish its sensory functions, it's either using the main or spinal nucleus of trigeminal or the mesencephalic nucleus, depending on what that function is. To accomplish its motor function of muscles of mastication, it's just going to use the motor nucleus of trigeminal. Okay? So, in other words, this cranial nerve is composed of axons from lots of different places. If that makes sense. Okay? All right, that's cranial nerve number 5. Oh, go ahead, Felicia. Yeah,
Sorry.
no, please, ask me.
Do any of them go into the main sensory nucleus?
So, you should know that there are, you should know there are two things, main sensory nucleus and spinal nucleus, but they function together.
Okay.
So, yes, but I'm just trying to make it simple. Yes, so you can either go into the main sensory nucleus or the spinal nucleus. We'll look at that a little bit later, but they function the same.
Okay.
Was there another question? I thought I saw a hand up. That was good. That's easy. Thank you for asking. Okay. Anybody else with other questions? I just wanted to make sense because it's kind of confusing, and this is the first one that's the most confusing. Okay, moving on down. Let's look at an easy one. A really simple one to think about is going to be the next one in line is going to be your abducens, your cranial nerve number 6. Okay, so if you remember, the cranial nerve number 6 is going to be most medial here. Okay, so here's my cranial nerve number 6. And this is going to be abducens. And that's cranial nerve number 6. Okay, like I said, this is an easy one. We just have one nucleus to worry about. It's a motor nucleus. It has its very own nucleus. It sits right here. Okay, and that's going to be your abducens nucleus. Okay, cranial nerve number 6 has one job in life. It uses its abducens nucleus to accomplish that. There's a neuronal cell body that sits here, and it's going to send out axons through cranial nerve number 6 to innervate lateral rectus muscles. So that's an easy one. I thought so. It was like somebody's screaming in there. It's like a Halloween prank. Oh, I'll tell you guys. Since you have anatomy now, right?
Yeah.
When I was a PST student, it was Halloween. True story. Okay. So we had, we were going into anatomy, and one of our classmates climbed into the tank and scared the bejeebers out of people walking. This best Halloween prank ever. I've never seen somebody jump so much, but true story. So we had spare tanks, and all I did was change the position of a spare tank with a tank that was known to have a body in it, and it's Halloween, so he just jumps out and scares everybody. So it was terrifying. It really was. Because I mean, you walk into your cadaver lab, and everything is so quiet and peaceful, and then all of a sudden he just jumps out and screams. I mean, it was mortifying. Okay. Halloween story. I'm reminded that of the sounds in the walls.
We need to know when to
True story.
stuff because we can switch it around.
True story. Okay, thinking about the next cranial nerve. Okay, next cranial nerve is going to be over here. So I'm going to represent the next cranial nerve on the opposite side because I have a little bit more space. Okay, this is going to be cranial nerve number 7. Okay, just a little bit lateral cranial nerve number 6. Okay, that's going to be cranial nerve number 7. And this is a big one. This is going to be, that's going to be your facial nerve. Remember, that has a lot of different functions. To accomplish the motor functions, the facial nerve uses the facial nucleus. So, lower motor neuron cell body in the facial nucleus sends out axons through the 7th cranial nerve to accomplish all of the voluntary motor functions for the 7th cranial nerve. Which are those? Yeah, muscles of facial expression. And that teeny tiny little muscle that everybody forgets about, stapedius. Cranial nerve number 7 uses the facial nucleus, which is its motor nucleus. Big job of muscles of facial expression and stapedius innervation. Cranial nerve number 7 also has a little bit of sensory function, okay, and to accomplish the sensory function, so information about sensation from the ear canal, so this is going to be ear canal sensation. So again, ear canal sensation is going to be sensory information coming into the system, and information about ear canal sensation is going to be traveling through the 7th cranial nerve, and since it's a general sensory component, it's going to synapse here either with the main sensory or spinal nucleus of trigeminal.
Wait,
Go ahead.
goes in, hits the nucleus, and then comes out and around?
No, information from ear canal. So ear canal sensation is what's coming from the outside, and I'm just showing you that it's parts. If you want to think about it backwards, that's fine. But these axons travel as part of the 7th cranial nerve. So the axons travel together and make the nerve. So the axons coming in are both motor and sensory in function. Okay. So sensation from the ear canal is going to come in, travel as part of the 7th cranial nerve, and bring that information to either the main sensory or spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Okay, any other questions about that? So that's just the general sensory function for cranial nerve number 7. It had just a little bit of sensory. It also had another sensory function too that we talked about before. Belle, go ahead.
You might have said this, but so does the axon like reach the nucleus, or is it right before it hits the nucleus and goes like back up? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this is information coming from this. This is the axon that's traveling.
Yeah.
That's the 7th cranial nerve.
Right.
Okay. That axon is coming in and synapses with a nucleus in the main and.
But like the red nucleus, the facial nucleus.
Oh, yeah.
Does it like go into the facial nucleus, or is it like just in the kind of nerve that it turns back and goes up?
Okay. So I think. Are you asking? So the facial nucleus, all it does is it has a lower motor neuron here
Right.
that sends out an axon through as part of the 7th cranial
So
nerve.
the sensory axon doesn't go inside the facial nucleus.
No.
It doesn't interact.
No, it doesn't interact
Yes,
with sensory.
okay.
Yes,
Got it.
it's
Sorry, I was not asking.
That's okay. I just didn't understand. The main, so the nucleus for the sensory function of cranial nerve number 7,
There in the.
main central and spinal nucleus of trigeminal. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, and there's another sensory function that we talked about for cranial nerve number 7. Okay, and that's going to be taste. And I said before that taste uses this purple nucleus down here, and the purple nucleus is going to be the solitary nucleus. Okay. So when I think about it, so this is going to be just taste from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Okay. That information is also going to travel as part of the 7th cranial nerve. And then synapse here with a neuronal cell body that resides in the solitary nucleus, delivering information about taste from anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Makes sense? So lots of different nuclei are used by cranial nerve number 7, and there's still one more function, or one more set of functions that we haven't talked about, and that's going to use a different nucleus, and I'll draw that one in over here. Remember the superior salivatory nucleus. That's a glandular function. So the superior salivatory nucleus, neuronal cell body, so it's motor. Neuronal cell body exists in here, and it's going to travel through cranial nerve number 7 and innervate submandibular, sublingual, and lacrimal glands. Okay. That's all cranial nerve number 7, all different functions that are accomplished because it's associated with a variety of different nuclei. Questions? No questions? Good. Okay, that's cranial nerve number 7 in a nutshell. All the different functions. So motor functions, muscles of facial expression and stapedius. Facial nucleus, a facial nerve uses the facial nucleus. It uses the superior salivatory nucleus to innervate submandibular, sublingual, and lacrimal glands. To receive information about ear canal sensation, it uses the spinal and or main nucleus of trigeminal. And receive information about taste from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, it's going to use the solitary nucleus. Okay. I see heads nodding. That's good. Perfect. Let's go ahead and take another 10-minute break.